There's probably a protocol for book reviews, but if you've viewed this channel before, you'll know that we have little time for convention and tradition. So with that in mind, I think you should buy the book you're about to hear about. And here is 5 reasons why. The first reason is this. If you're watching this, chances are you're allied to the demolition industry. This is, at heart, a demolition book. The second reason is that if you're watching this, you're almost certainly a human, and there is a huge amount of humanity in the book as well. The third reason is that there is a lot to learn in this book, and you never know when you might need the lessons and information contained within. The fourth reason is that demolition books, particularly those of an educational kind, are a rare and valuable commodity, and we should be thankful when one finally comes along. And the fifth, and perhaps the most important reason, is that all the proceeds are going to charity. So, hit the pause button, head over to dangerous-structure.com, buy yourself a copy, or better still multiple copies, and then come back here for our interview with the author, Paul Ford. I use index tabs to mark pages in books or future reference so that I can find the bits that I need to refer back to. And I can tell you, I generally use 3 or 4 per book. Let me just show you. That's what my copy of your book looks like right now. It looks like my grandchildren have decorated. I think you owe me a pack of index tabs.
Well, is that because you're intrigued on elements, or you just don't understand them and you've got to ask questions? One's good and one's not.
It is completely the former. It was. I thought, well, I might need to refer back to that, and I might need to refer back to that, and lo and behold, there I was all the way through it, and I've used an entire pack of index tabs.
There's been some really nice feedback. Terry Quamby bought a copy today, which I'm really pleased to send to you.
I can tell you who recommended it if you like.
I suspected as much. And do you know what? It gave me a real sense of pleasure to send it to him, because when I was younger and first when I did my sort of IDE bit, Terry gave a sort of an advanced lesson in terms of the exam and everything else, and he was an absolute gentleman, and he helped me massively. He's not aware of that, but he did, and I've always held him in high regard for that reason. And so it gave me great pleasure to write in the front of the book, "You are one of the industry's absolute gents," and it's good that he's got a copy. So I'm really pleased.
What actually made you write the book in the first place?
Well, I suppose granted a bit of time in the first instance, to sort of reflect on things during COVID, and there was all kinds of other distractions going on. But we haven't been able to get Grenfell out of our minds at all since the tragedy happened. And I suppose, having had the responsibility of dangerous structures since 2005, there's been literally hundreds. I mean, literally hundreds of dangerous structures that I've responded to, and so it becomes part of your career. And I've been doing this now since the late 80s, and there's lots to share. And I really truly believe in the importance of sharing, experience, recommendations, skills that others might just find intriguing, might actually benefit from. It could help save some people, and you just never know. So I found myself with some time to do it, and I sat down and started to research what might already be out there. And looking through BS 6187, there was nothing in there that was specifically aligned to dangerous structures. I was also conscious of, having been out and done hundreds of incidents, you meet all manner of people on the local authority side, district surveyors as they're referred to in London, but building control officers around the country. And some of those poor people end up putting their hand up for doing the sort of the out of hours shift, and something tragic happens, like a big fire or an explosion or a collapse or whatever, and they find themselves out in the field with a responsibility that they've never held before. And it occurred to me that we need to get some consistency. It didn't occur to me, it's absolutely obvious we need to get some consistency. And so I thought to myself, well, I'll do some research and see what's out there in terms of a training manual and what have you. And I couldn't find anything at all. And it's funny, because in that initial search, which is at the beginning of 2020, I couldn't find anything. But having, taken the name Dangerous Structure, and it's been a working title all the way through the process of writing the book, I then, literally about 3 months ago, I finished the book in 2020, but about 3 months ago, I just did a couple of hours on the internet looking around to see what I could find in bookshops and what have you. And I actually found the first book about dangerous structures, which is written by a guy called George Blagrove in 1896. And this book is the first edition, and it's the first record I can find anywhere of anybody that's written a book about dangerous structures. And it's actually a book for practical men, it's titled, dated 1896. And right at the front of it, he makes an introduction to the responsibility of attending a dangerous structure. And he refers to it as similar to that as a professional doctor or surgeon that's got to make a decision about something that's in a very bad way, in inverted commas. And the decisions that you make are so important. And the book is, it's this thick. But he came out with a second edition in 1906, which is this one, there was obviously some more information to be shared, and it was obviously quite popular amongst its readers. It's not anything like the book that I've written. It's more about what a beam does, what a girder does, what a foundation does, how piers work, and how trusses work in a roof space and what have you. So I suppose I'm getting to the point, Mark, that there's never been too much written about it, and the code of practice for our industry doesn't do too much on it. And so there's an awful lot of people out there that get the responsibility for turning up to something that's fundamentally undermined or struggling to stand up. And they've got great responsibility to bring it down safely or support it safely or protect infrastructure from it. So there needed to be some sort of guide. And so I thought, well, if I start with my experiences and then put in my rationale, sort of the procedural that I follow, it might be something that could get out amongst not only our industry, but also the local boroughs and the local authorities, even the emergency services, and search and rescue groups around the country. And believe it or not, we've had some inquiries and sent books right the way across the world at the moment. So that's really where it came from.
We'll get to the details of what's actually in the book in a second, but one of the things that struck me was you mentioned in the book that you are actually dyslexic. I've written a couple of very small and very poorly sold books in my time, and I write for a living. How do you get by writing a book when you're actually dyslexic?
A lot of rereads, an awful lot of concentration. I would say 90% of this book was written between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. When I can sort of really sit down and focus on it. Dyslexia is not an uncommon thing. Unfortunately, a lot of children don't even know that it's dyslexia that they suffer from, and they get put to the bottom of a class, and they struggle through life. And it is actually something that you can work and deal with. To read a book is a challenge. To read a book out loud is almost impossible, and I avoid it at all costs. But what was important to me about writing the book, and I have to be absolutely honest with you, I toyed with this so much as to whether I should include that within the book, because it is a vulnerability, or it feels like it's perceived as a vulnerability. It's something that you're not very good at. But it was important to me, in conclusion, when I came to sort of the final decision to go ahead and print that part of the book, because there are many egos out there in business and in our industry and in every walk of life. And I didn't want this book to be perceived as an ego trip. But more importantly, I wanted it to be a booster for people's confidence that, I've sat on a machine, I've pushed the barrow, I've been there, early in the morning doing the horrible jobs, and then late at night doing the bookwork. If you work hard, you can do well. And it was important that I showed the reader who I was, and where I got my sort of my grounding, if you like.
Very early in the book, you outline some of the key challenges that you face in an emergency demolition situation, and one of those challenges, you say, is emotion. I really enjoyed that part of the book, but what do you mean by that? The challenge of dealing with emotion.
Well, every single incident is different. Every single incident it generally follows some form of tragedy, whether it's a collapse excavation or a fire or some shoddy building work, whatever it may be that you turn up to try and remediate, somebody's been affected. And so whether it's somebody at the ticker tape as the area is being cordoned off, or somebody within the team that needs to get to somewhere urgently because of information or some infrastructure that's been affected by what you're doing. So wherever you turn up and everybody's looking at each other until the guy that's got the responsibility is here. So as soon as you walk into that environment, you're the guy that's going to bring resolution. And the urgency, the emotion is then really pushed onto you. And it's one of the most important things that you have to learn to manage is actually the emotion of others that are going to, impose some peer pressure or impose some emotional importance on making a decision too quickly. And the last thing you can to make a decision to change the dynamic of something that's already weakened without the props already beside you, ready to put them in place, if something doesn't go quite according to plan, is a mistake. And so you've got to really just sort of step back from the emotion and look at what's in front of you before you make a decision to go through a set of stages that will come to a point where you can at least hold again and give it some thought. And that's not, taking away the fact that you could have persons trapped or missing. There are all kinds of conditions that you've got to take into account. None greater than Grenfell and the emotion of that absolute tragic situation there. But equally, there are hundreds of very capable and keen and willing emergency services people that need to get into that building, but actually controlling the importance of their safety is far more important than recovering people that are already deceased. And so it's just managing emotion.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really made the book stand out for me is that it's a human touch. It could have been a very dry textbook on, in this situation you do this, in this situation you do that, whereas you do go into the humanity of it. And one of my favorite chapters or sections in the book, and I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but where you're talking about an old man and his life savings. Obviously that in itself must have been emotional. Without giving away too many spoilers, tell me about that one.
Yeah. This followed all the riots in 2011, and we were in 14 different dangerous structures at the same time right across London. There was the furniture store where you got a very famous image of the woman jumping out of the window. That was dealt with by the landowner, the freeholder of that premises. But we were in another part of Croydon in a huge parade of buildings that were residents to, or the residencies of countless families that lived up that street. And there was one gentleman who lived above and behind a public house, which had been completely taken out by the fire. And he came over to me one day, despite my best advice to all my team to avoid, engaging with the public when we're really focusing on trying to remediate a dangerous structure. He came over to me. The district surveyor for the response had said he should speak to me. So I, sort of said, well, how can I help? And it transpired that he had lost his life savings in the fire, but that wasn't his primary concern. He'd also lost his cat, his beloved cat, and he said to me, first and foremost, could I find his cat? And secondly, if it was at all possible, could we have a good look around, see if we could find his savings? This gentleman had just lost his wife, and he was he'd just lost the shirt off of his back too. And I suppose his only comfort in life was his pet. And the long and the short of it, Mark, after toying with that task and actually spending a lot more time than we would have ordinarily spent looking through debris, which, quite frankly, given the view, and there are views of that in the book, you would never imagine that it's all possible to recover a small tin from an old kitchen that was located on the second floor when everything is pretty much in a pile of 3 foot of debris on the ground, somewhere below, where a roof used to stand or travel. And so the great part of the story, the sort of the lovely ending to it, was that we did manage to find his savings, which, apart from some very charred edges was there in totality, and he was able to get that to the bank. He hadn't used the bank previously because he didn't think they were safe, which was kind of ironic, really. And furthermore, he did have a good idea where his cat might be located, and we did manage to find his cat too, which we returned to him. So he was extremely grateful to be able to at least put some closure on that further tragic part of it. But he was also eternally grateful. It's an unusual thing to have been able to do, but we managed it on that occasion.
One of the key drivers of this book, obviously, is Grenfell, and you were the first civilian to set foot inside the Grenfell Tower after that horrible blaze. We'll get to the details of that in a second. But one of the things that stood out for me, and I'm not going to try and compare my experience with yours, but I went up to the Didcot Power Station the day after the incident, and 4 guys were tragically killed. And I was literally going from TV interview to TV interview. So I was busy the entire day, probably a 12-hour day. And what struck me, and you've done it also in the book, is the fact that even though you're busy, even though you're focused on something, your brain has this uncanny knack of storing away other details. Like I remember conversations with a policeman and an old woman delivering sandwiches to keep the policeman safe and warm and all that. And yours is very much like that. I mean, you highlighted things like messages on packs of sandwiches and, bizarrely, the songs of Bob Marley. Did you actually make a mental note of those, or a physical note, or did they just come back to you while you were writing the book?
They were parts of the response that have stayed with me, and there's many more, Mark, to be honest with you. And some would be wrong to reflect on. Others I could, but I didn't want to lose the reader at the same time. But yeah, there were moments in there. I think going into a building, any building, whether it's Grenfell or any building that is undermined and about to collapse, or just suffered some huge fire, and people are trying to get to parts of it and need your help. Your actual awareness is quite profound of everything, of every noise. We in our industry, we always talk about the building talking to us. Well, it's the first thing that you're thinking when you're in a dangerous structure. Trust me, it's more profound than it is ever when you're on a demolition job. But when that building's talking to you and you can hear every creak and every conversation, and a knock and drop and something falling away, something falling down, you sort of come out and you reflect on all of these things, particularly the things that actually give you an emotional sense, as it did the day that I was, the point of the Bob Marley was, we were in, USAR had propped some of the floors of the building around a particular column that had failed, and they needed their props just in case they were called to another incident. So we had to swap their props out. So, a cluster of about 20 props need to be taken out, and a new cluster of props replacing them. And I'd planned it and got ready to do this piece of work on a Sunday morning. And as I sort of stood in that 13th floor window looking out of the A40, all these vehicles going about their business, thankful that they're not in that building, or weren't in that building, I should say, Bob Marley started playing from a garage somewhere down below, within 100 yards of the building, but at the highest volume. And it's telling me, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And of course, it wasn't a message to me, it was a message to the community, but that's how they were communicating. And you can't forget that kind of thing.
It goes back to that thing you were saying about emotion as well. And this wasn't a dangerous structure at all, but I remember visiting a tower block that was about to be imploded, and obviously they'd cleared all the people out, months in advance and everything else. But walking through, the green area around that building, there were discarded children's toys, and that is so poignant. You must have seen an awful lot of that in and around Grenfell.
Sadly, I did, Mark. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I did. When I went in on the Friday, there was an awful lot of that around the place, and none of that's reflected in the book. That just carries with me for the rest of my life. But none of that's in the book. It's just a very, very surreal thing to have experienced.
During your response to that, and other emergencies, you obviously work very closely with other emergency services. and we'll come on to one in particular in a second, but who are they, and you know, what is their usual role when they're not dealing with tragedies like Grenfell and that kind of thing?
So we're all aware of the emergency services. We're aware of, you know, fire, police, and ambulance. That's commonplace in society now. But there are many more departments that just appear, and you know, I only find out about them when I get my first experience of working with them. But you know, the UK is protected by a process called resilience, and resilience, you can find out about resilience online at gov.uk. Just type in resilience.gov.uk, and it'll explain the purpose of all of the different emergency services working together in an incident like something as tragic as Grenfell, or an incident where we've got, you know, some severe adverse weather, or something of a, you know, more sinister nature with terrorism. And so resilience coordinates how all of these different departments and different emergency services and consultants and specialists come together, local authorities, government, and so on. But at Grenfell, obviously, initially the fire services are responsible for the building, for the response, but you have USAR working with them, which is urban search and rescue, where, you know, these individuals are fire services trained individuals that go to another level of training. That was brought about by 9/11. Our guys were taken to America and trained in Texas about, you know, other skills to access buildings that have been undermined, compromised in some way, to either find and recover trapped individuals or bring out deceased safely. So USAR is a very important part of our response there. And then you've got, obviously, you know, the likes of the HSE are in attendance, and, you know, HSE at Grenfell would have obviously had a great interest in, well, as they did at Didcot, as they have you know, any major incident like that, as to why and how on earth that could have possibly happened. But furthermore, they're also there to coordinate a team approach, you know, and enable conversations to happen. They were really effective at Grenfell. Some really good people. Then you've got departments. You know, obviously you've got the Met Police doing what the police would do with the investigation and safe recovery and protecting the sort of the boundaries and what have you. Then you've got groups called DVI, which is disaster victim identification. So these are specially trained Metropolitan Police officers that are trained to go and find victims in the most, you know, devastating environments. And the team that were at Grenfell had only just returned from Manchester. You'd had the London Bridge incident, and so the DVI team were a huge part. They worked and responded to all the requirements of the coroner, but they're a team of elite police officers, basically. And then you've got HART, which is hazardous area response team, which is effectively ambulance paramedics that are trained to work within the danger zone, as opposed to working at the perimeter of a danger zone, where USAR or fire services would bring victims and injured persons to the boundary. HART are trained to work within the danger zone. So they've got the same skills and awarenesses of USAR, to work within those kind of zones. So you've got those as responders, and then you've got the local authorities that take responsibility for coordinating information back up into COBRA, you know, Cabinet Office Boardroom, which is a silver and gold response team that report back up into local authority and government. There's a lot.
One of the things that really stood out through that section of the book, and when you were saying that, is the fact that, you know, you're talking about people that are highly trained, highly responsible, you know, government linked. You know, they are figures of authority, but to a degree, when you and your team arrive on site, you become, at least partly, a leader of that. I mean, that speaks volumes for you and your team, but I think it speaks volumes for the skills that we don't often talk about within the demolition industry as well.
Absolutely, and you know, I make a point in the book about what you can expect on different types of category of dangerous structure. You've got category 1 dangerous structure, which is just as simple as a chimney that could fall off the top of a roof, or a garden wall that could blow over in the wind, and it's an observation of a member of the public or the local authority, and you'd go there because it's still considered a dangerous structure. A dangerous structure is when it can affect the public. You get a category 2, which could be an explosion, a fire, a significant collapse, a significant dangerous structure. And then cat 3 is where it's a Grenfell, it's an act of terrorism, it's a major disaster. And when you turn up to that major disaster, even like the first one, the cat 1, it's the guy's on his way, or the team are on their way. And you'll walk into that room, whether there's one person there or 30 people there, and they're all round a circle, and they look at you and go, right, you're here now, what are we going to do? And you've got to manage that pressure. You've got to anticipate it, and you've got to be able to manage that pressure because it's significant, as you can imagine.
And that, I think, is the point that I was trying to say eloquently, that you've got all these highly trained people, but there will be times when they look to the hairy-ass demolition man to make things right, which, again, I just think precisely speaks volumes for the demolition fraternity.
Absolutely. It really does. It really does.
You've been very actively involved in the formation of the NESST. For those that don't know, and they will if they read the book, what is the NESST? Who's involved, and what basically is its function?
So NEST is the National Emergency Services Support Task Force. We had come up with, we're working with fire services. They've got an acronym for everything. They wouldn't say toilet. There'll be an acronym for toilet. They've got one for everything. So NEST is a mechanism that fills a void in time that when a blue light is called to a dangerous structure or an incident, obviously the blue light is the first point of call. The blue light goes out. What follows closely behind, but never super efficiently behind, at times, is the local authority's ability to respond. So in the dead of night, there's an explosion, there's a big fire at a storage facility, and the storage facility is next to network rail. As that's raging away, the calls from the blue light will be made to the local authority, and the local authority will have a list of people that are on call, and they'll ring them at home in the dead of night and say, look, there's an incident over at this place, can you get over there? Emergency services have got possession of the site at the moment, but we need to be prepared to take on that responsibility when the emergency services are finished. And what you could have, there could be a 2-hour delay in the emergency services seeing somebody from the local authority. And in that period, they could have a need for structural advice from a structural engineer or a demolition engineer, and when we're talking about dangerous structures, the relevance, the importance of a demolition engineer, somebody that actually understands how a building will react, not necessarily why it's standing up, the foundations are this big because the calculation tells me X, actually fundamentally why they're standing up, how a building will react if we take out that part of the building, or if that part of the building has already collapsed or exploded away. And that period is a really important period in the emergency services ability to get to survivors, get to people trapped or deceased, or protect local infrastructure. And so they need to be able to call on somebody instantly to bridge that gap. And it could be talking to somebody down secure communication networks, or it could be saying, can you get here, foot to the metal and get here as quick as you can, and give us some help and advice. And that's really working with the incident commander. And if he looks at you and says, where do you think that building's going to go? And you say directly towards that infrastructure, he might then make some decisions to protect that infrastructure, or at least shut it down. Without the benefit of that demolition engineer in that incident room, or in that command center, he's not able to make that decision confidently, because it's not his skill set. His skill set's tackling fire, not necessarily, predicting where a building might end up or the implications of what's going on with the fire as it is at the moment. So NEST came about to bridge the gap. Now, of course, elephant in the room, whenever we ask a consultant to do something, it is money. and it's been a problem for the emergency services with funding and how funding works for them to get that kind of support up to now. And it occurred to me that, you know, there's some good folks out there that wouldn't mind giving a little bit back, that have got great skills and ability, that could actually give that pro bono to the emergency services, make themselves available to them. You know, we've been responsible for this now for about 18 months, Mark, and the phone's rung once. It could ring 3 times next week. And it's actually then about, you know, joining a provision. There's criteria to join. There's criteria about the quality and the experience, competence of the individuals that are in it. But there's also an awful lot of credibility to be selected to be a member of Nest. And so, while my colleague Mark Smith and I have got it off the ground with Dave O'Neill from London Fire Services, Julian Birch from Michael Barclay Partnership Engineers, and sadly Jim King, who was the district surveyor for Grenfell, and sadly passed away just a couple of months ago now, suddenly. We got this formally off the ground, and it's now very much part of emergency services response as a formal provision. We are formally a blue light provider. So we're you know, launched this in the southeast for now, and next year we're going to take it national. And it's amazing actually that the book has really, you know, the conversation around it has been positive, but the book's actually stimulated quite a bit of interest as well. And I've even had 2 inquiries on it today from engineers that would like to be part of it, which is absolutely fantastic. We've got a lot of work to do, but it's very encouraging. So that's what it's all about.
One of the things that really stood out for me is the fact that your job is doubly hard, I would imagine. When an average demolition, you know, somebody has plenty of time to look over it and find out what's what, and then they also have time to deal with it. Yours, you have no clue what you're dealing with, and you're generally working, at least to a large degree, against the clock. How do you go about that?
Mark, it's not you talk it up, mate. We you know, I think we're all good at our job, and we're good in our comfort zone. I couldn't do yours, mate. Good, you know, hats off to you. It's just training, isn't it? It's just experience. You know, your conversation around supervisors and you know, how long it takes to become a supervisor. I think it's all driven by experience. And if a supervisor's good and they've got the aptitude for it, there's no reason why they shouldn't hold a card quicker than 5 years. You get used to and get good at what you're good at. And it's as simple as that. So, yeah, listen, I'm not going to take any praise for having a lot on and turning up and being able to make decisions. You've either got it or you haven't, I suppose.
I've got to ask about your wife, who doesn't get a huge mention in the book. She gets a couple, doesn't get a huge amount, but she's obviously a very key character. How does she cope with watching you drive off towards another emergency situation?
She's going to love that she's got a mention anyway, Mark. Thank you for that. How does she? She's not very good with it, but she's also very supportive. She's a real warrior. I mean, to put funny, we were just talking about Nest last weekend. Mark and I were asked to go to London Fire Services head offices in Union Street in London to give a talk to some engineers that are responsible in ISAR, which is the UK's international capability to respond to an incident and go and support a nation in a desperate place, like Haiti following earthquakes or whatever. So ISAR is International Search and Rescue, and there's these engineers that are prepared to just drop things at the drop of a hat and jump on a plane and get out there and work with fire services for up to 28 days in isolation. And I was, I've been pestered about joining that, but it's not one I've even bothered bringing home, Mark, because the answer on that one is going to be a very firm no. But I'm all right in the UK.
You haven't written this book to fund your retirement. In fact, the proceeds aren't going to you at all, are they? Tell me more.
No, they're not. So all the proceeds from the book are going to charity. Our company were kind enough to support me and pay for all of the printing. So we got that through our business. And then all of the sales goes to charity, 72% of which goes to Grenfell charities and good causes in the local community. And the other 28% will go to Mates in Mind, which I'm sure you know is a phenomenal charity aligned to the construction industry that looks after our lot. You know, our lot that are, you said hairy arse earlier, so I'll say it. You know, we're perceived to be the hairy arse guy. We should be tough. We should be able to go down the pub and, you know, water off a duck's back, and we shouldn't worry about things. But there's a ton of stuff that goes on outside of work that we, as business owners and managers and, you know, responsible parties, supervisors and so on, we don't know what's going on in people's minds. And there is a charity there that does give some phenomenal support to people in the construction industry. So we've got, you know, there's two charities that benefit from it. But of course, you won't know where to buy it unless I say it's at www.dangerous-structure.com, where all the money goes to charity.
Your team, the guys around you, and I'm not talking specifically here about Grenfell, although I would imagine that was probably the toughest of the lot. But what checks do you have in place to make sure that they're doing okay? Because, you know, some of the things that they're seeing and having to encounter, you can't train for that, can you? Experience, I'm sure, builds up a thick skin, much the same as it does with emergency services. But, you know, do your guys go through counselling, or, you know, do you put your arm around at the end of the day and make sure they're all okay?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't help but refer to Grenfell and the experience of Grenfell, where, you know, we had 25 guys turn up on day one from across our, you know, business at that time. They were just, you know, randomly selected because they've experienced dangerous structures before and said, you know, we need to get a team over at Grenfell. Are you prepared to go? And they said yes. Now there's a bit of bravado sometimes saying yes in front of your mates, and then actually when you land on an incident and you're either looking up at 24 floors, or you're looking at a building that's collapsed, or you're looking down a trench that's collapsed and somebody's lost their life, that changes. That's a bit of a moment where you go, right, this is real. And the only thing that I've found that I can successfully do is actually make, you know, the right people available, and they're just over there if you need them. But you don't need to do this. You know, you've got to put your hand up if you don't feel comfortable. You've got to come and talk to me and my colleagues. You know, that, you know, as I mentioned Mark a moment ago, we always make ourselves available to them. And as managers, I think that, you know, fundamentally, we can't ask anybody to do what we wouldn't be prepared to do ourselves, of course. But equally, we can't shoehorn somebody into something they're not comfortable about. And we ask and ask and ask, and we ask privately, we ask in a forum where we're all together. It's probably the most common thing that we discuss, because it is a hellish task. And if you're not that in the right frame of mind to be able to deal with it, then you really mustn't be there. And there's no shame in that. You don't get a black mark. I mean, for goodness sakes, and we sort of make that very, very clear. But we've just got an incredible bunch of people that work with us, and fortunately, everybody's been able to deal with it really well.
Paul, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure, almost as much of a pleasure as reading the book. And I don't want to be seen to be blowing smoke up anyone's rear end, but I really did. I mean, I read that in 2 sittings, sort of set aside a part of a Friday and a Saturday, and just absolutely rattled through it. And I've been back through it several times since. I've recommended it to anyone in the industry that will listen. I've recommended it to people that aren't in the industry that will listen as well. It really is a fantastic piece of work, and I commend you for doing it, and I'd recommend it to anyone that's watching this or listening to this, and particularly the very fact that the money is going to charity, I think, is just an astonishing thing. So hats off to you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and you know, thank you very much for, one, showing an interest, two, actually, you know, taking your weekend away and spending the time reading it. The feedback you've given me has been so encouraging, and the support you've shown in doing this interview, and you know, using your website to promote it. I'm eternally grateful, as the charities will be too. But if any of the listeners or people that are viewing this want to raise any sort of queries, I'm very happy to help anybody that's got some questions about it. So thank you.